Hello everyone, my name is Olivia and today I'm going to do a video recommending short books to read towards the end of the year in case you have a Goodreads goal and you're looking at it and you're like, wow, I'm like 3 or 4 books behind schedule or maybe even 10 books behind schedule. Here are a couple of short books under 300 pages that you can read to boost your Goodreads challenge and to hopefully beat it by the end of the year. Or if you don't have a challenge, here are just short books that I have to recommend for you. So the first book that I have to recommend for you is The Memory Police. This was a book that I took out from my library and I read in one sitting. The Memory Police is a translated Japanese novel centered around an island full of inhabitants whose memories are being manipulated by the Memory Police. So as time goes on, things fall out of their memory. First it's ribbons, then it's roses, then it's birds, and then it's body parts. And this book follows this one woman who is an author, and she decides to hide her editor in her house because her editor is one of the rare few who still has those memories of those things that have been forgotten. So while everyone else forgets about roses and birds and they don't remember what it feels like to think about those things and they feel no particular attachment to it, this editor remembers everything and he knows that the Memory Police is manipulating everyone else on the island. So this book is a gripping science fiction dystopian novel that just completely sucked me in. It was so interesting, it's so thought-provoking, it's a book that you just won't stop thinking about, and I finished it in one sitting because I was just obsessed with the whole entire premise. I thought it was so cool that it explained how memories work and how we can forget things so easily, and once we forget things then we have no particular attachment to it, so we don't have any memories or any feelings towards something that we forgot. It was just a very interesting novel, and if you're looking for a dystopian or a literary fiction novel, I would highly recommend The Memory Police. It was so good, I cannot recommend it enough. If you are looking for a short romance to read, I would highly recommend Raft by Rebecca Weatherspoon. I read this also in one sitting. I believe it is about a woman who is a successful doctor. She has twin girls and her live-in nanny has recently quit without any warning. So Dr. Sloan has to scramble around and find a new live-in nanny to take care of her twins because she is a doctor and she works very long hours, so she has to have someone live in the house in order to take care of her daughters. So in comes Raft, who is a full-time nanny and he's very good with children, and he decides to take the job, live in Dr. Sloan's house, and while he is working with her daughters and he's taking care of her daughters, they also realize that they have mutual feelings for each other. So things get a little bit complicated in that household, and it is so beautifully written, it's so wholesome. The main characters, their chemistry is just like off the charts, and it was just such a pleasant read, and I highly recommend Rebecca Weatherspoon's romances because they are some of my favorites in the world, and the way that she writes these relationships and how they grow and how they learn from each other and how they explore their feelings for each other, it's just so heartwarming and it makes me want to reread them all over again. So I would highly recommend Raft or any other book by Rebecca Weatherspoon because they tend to be a little bit shorter than other romances. The next book that I would recommend you can listen to on audiobook, I would actually very much recommend that you do, and it is The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo, and this is a book that I recommend all the time on this channel. It is actually a book in verse, so it's a bunch of poems that kind of tell you a story about this one girl who lives in the city, and she is in love with slam poetry, but it's very much like something that she shouldn't be doing because her mother doesn't approve of it. So it explores this one girl's love for poetry, and Elizabeth Acevedo herself narrates the audiobook. I believe it's 4 hours long, so you could listen to it in a couple of sittings. It flows so naturally, and the way that Elizabeth Acevedo narrates it just adds so much passion to the story. It is such a good YA novel in verse, and if you're looking for some beautiful poetry, I would highly recommend The Poet X. If you're looking for something a little bit darker and a little bit more sinister, like a thriller, I would recommend Security. I read this recently, and I would not recommend that you listen to an audiobook because the way that the book is structured is so intricate and so unique that you most definitely have to read it physically in order to get the impact from it, because the audiobook is a little bit more mushy because of the way the book is structured. But basically, sometimes some of the pages are split into columns with different perspectives, so the way that you have to read the book is very different from a straight prose type of book, so the audiobook wouldn't work for you. So I would highly recommend reading it physically. So Security is actually influenced by Rebecca, I believe, that really classic novel about the Mandalay, and this is about a group of employees who work at a hotel. It's called the Mandalay, and it is weirdly structured, and it's about to be open to the public, and they're all setting up their different stations. They're trying to make it as perfect as possible. But while they're all working on the last few days before the opening, they are also being watched by an omnipresent security team that takes care of the hotel, because it's a very expensive, very important hotel. And while that is also happening, there is a killer in the hotel killing off the employees one by one. And what's cool about it is that we get to see the whole entire story from the perspective of the security officers looking at everyone in the hotel through all these different cameras that are set up in the hotel. So you get to see the killer's perspective, you get to see the employees, and you get to see the crimes that are happening slowly but surely. It's kind of like if Scream became a novel. It's just so interesting, and I love how I started this book and I was like, wow, I can't believe I started a slasher novel and every single character is dying. How dare that happen? Because after a while you become attached to some of the characters and you don't want them to get hurt, but then they get hurt because it's a slasher novel. They're supposed to get hurt. But if you're looking for a really quick, really intricately, weirdly structured book, I would highly recommend Security. And I haven't seen a book that is structured the same way that Security is. I feel like Security flows like a movie because the perspectives just change so fluidly, so it's very omnipresent. You get to see every single character's point of view, and I believe this is also under 300 pages. I read this in a couple of sittings. It was so good. If you're looking for a graphic novel to read before 2019 ends and you're looking for something very quick to read in order to knock out that Goodreads challenge, I would highly recommend Sheets by Brenna Thumler. This is an adorable graphic novel centered around a teenage girl who works in her family's laundromat, and it is being haunted by a little ghost covered in a bedsheet. It's such a beautifully illustrated novel. It has a bunch of pinks, blues, and green tones, and it just reminds me of Steven Universe in the way that it is colored. It is such a wholesome little graphic novel, and I cannot get enough of it. I always recommend it to people when they're looking for graphic novels to read. It is a very quick read. I believe it is middle grade as well. Yes, it is middle grade. And it is just so adorable and cute, and you can most definitely finish this in one sitting. Sheets is a book that I would highly recommend all year round, but if you're really scrambling to finish books quickly towards the end of the year, this one's a good bet. The next book I have to recommend is another translated novel. It is translated from German, and it is The End of Loneliness by Benedict Wells. This is a book I recently finished, and it is a book centered around these siblings who lost their parents very early on in their teenage years, and they are just growing and learning from that. And this explores basically the entirety of their lives as they grow older and as they get into relationships, as they have children, and it just explores how different these three siblings are and how one is always wanting to escape reality. He doesn't really know what he wants to do in life. One is very just, I would say, like kind of like a bland person. He has a job and he's very happy with his life, but he doesn't really feel fulfilled. And then their sister is much more erratic. She doesn't really know what she wants in life, and she's always quitting things, starting new things, running away. And it just explores their lives and how they interconnect and how grief can blanket you for an entire life, and it shows how you have to learn from life and you just have to accept the good, the bad, and the ugly. And it was just such a wonderfully written novel. I felt so many emotions while reading this. I felt anger, I felt frustration, I felt complete sadness. I was sobbing in bed one night listening to this on audiobook, just crying for a straight hour. I've never cried that much listening to a book than I did with this and A Little Life, and this is just a wonderful literary fiction. I really enjoyed the audiobook. I tried reading it physically, but I knew it would take me too long, so I switched to audiobook. But you can read it physically. It's still a pretty short novel. It's less than 300 pages. When I was halfway through this book, I was like, oh, it's an alright book. I don't really need to keep it on my shelves. But once I got towards the end, I just realized how much it impacted me, and then I just had to keep it on my shelves because it was just so good. If you're looking for a classic to read that is very short, I would recommend The Great Gatsby. The Great Gatsby is such a quick novel, and if you you need an excuse to reread it or read it for the first time, now is the perfect time to do so because it is very short, very quick. The writing style is very easy to follow along with, and it is the perfect book to pick up towards the end of the year when you're scrambling to find things to read, to boost that Goodreads challenge, or just to beat your own personal challenge that you've set for yourself as a reader. The next short piece of work that I would recommend that you read is a poetry collection, and it is Water Runs Red by Jenna Claire. Jenna Claire is a dear friend of mine, and she wrote a poetry collection, but what interests me the most about her poetry collection and what makes me love it so much is the fact that it is full of typography that she created herself. It's full of doodles, it is full of photos. It is such a wonderfully made poetry collection. It's unlike anything I've ever seen before, and if you want to get it in color, you could buy the ebook of it and then you could see all her pictures in color, but the physical copy is just as beautiful because the way that she created the novel and the way that she created the pages to look like they are grainy is just so beautiful. And her poetry is about her own life, about bad friendships, about finding good friendships, asexuality, and just current events in our lives. And I most definitely think this is one of the most unique type of poetry collections I've ever seen, and I will always be recommending this to people because I'm just so proud of Jenna Claire's work, and it is just beautiful. If you want a beautiful poetry collection that you could look back on and just continuously reread poems that you love, Water Runs Red is a really good choice. The last book that I have to recommend is another literary fiction. I read this on audiobook and I really enjoyed listening to it on audiobook, and it is Everything I Never Told You by Celeste. This is a story about a family who is just struck with devastation after their daughter, frankly their favorite daughter, has died. So it follows the mother, the father, and the siblings as they kind of live their new life without Lydia, and it's exploring how each person in this family grieves in a different way, and while that is happening, secrets are also unfolding, both about Lydia's life and also about the siblings and the parents' lives, because Lydia was kind of the glue that was holding this house together, and now that she's gone, things are unraveling. And I think this really explores grief in a great way compared to The End of Loneliness. Not to say that this doesn't explore grief in a great way, but this one is primarily centered around grief and how it affects you and how it affects people differently and how people cope with it differently. This much more explores life in general, but also grief. But this one was so well written, and Celeste Ng is just an author for me at this point, and if you listen to it on audiobook, I'm sure you could finish it very quickly because it was just so gripping and it was just so interesting. And once I finished the audiobook, I knew I had to get myself a copy because I feel like this is a book that I would actually reread, which is very rare for me to say. I usually don't reread books, but this is something that I would definitely come back to and want to just reference or reread because it was so well written. And I hope you enjoyed all these small book recommendations. I really enjoy small books because I love just speeding through a story, but I also really enjoy long books too. Maybe I'll make a long books video, maybe books over 500 pages. If you're interested in that, if you're one of the people who actually really enjoys reading a long book and spending a lot of time with that story. But these are some books that I would recommend for you to read in case you are looking at your Goodreads challenge and you're sweating, or in case you're just looking for a short book to read maybe on vacation, or if you want to just read a short book on a weekend. These are some short books that you can pick up, and I love them all so much. So these are all very good recommendations for you because I tend to love short books more. So thank you so much for watching. Be sure to tell me how many books you have read so far this year. But if you want to connect with me on Instagram or any other place like my website to see my book reviews or some lifestyle posts, those are all linked down below. And thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for all your support and all your love and all your kindness. And I hope you have a good day and good luck reading because the end of the year is fast approaching, so we need all the luck we can get. Bye!